On a chilly autumn morning in Nebraska, when most people were just starting their day with warm cups of coffee, a truck driver was making a decision that would change not only his life, but the lives of 12 innocent puppies forever. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and a light fog hung over the quiet countryside roads. This truck driver, a man who'd spent 20 years on the road, lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of town. His only companion was a beautiful German shepherd named Luna, who he kept mainly as a guard dog for his property. He never really saw her as a pet, more like a living security system. He'd feed her and provide basic shelter, but that was about it. No walks in the park, no playing fetch, and definitely no cuddles on the couch. Life was simple and predictable for both of them until one day, Luna surprised everyone by giving birth to 12 adorable puppies. The truck driver hadn't even realized she was pregnant. He'd been away on a long haul when it happened, and when he returned home, his neighbor, who occasionally checked on Luna, excitedly shared the news. The puppies were like tiny copies of their mother, some with darker fur, others with lighter patches, but all with those signature German shepherd ears that seemed too big for their little heads. They would tumble around in the backyard, playing with each other, their tiny paws kicking up dirt as they wrestled and chased each other's tails. Their playful barks and yips filled the usually quiet property with life. But the truck driver didn't see the joy in their presence. All he saw was a problem: 12 hungry mouths to feed, vet bills he didn't want to pay, and the responsibility of finding homes for them all. He wasn't ready for any of this. The puppies were about 6 weeks old now, just starting to eat solid food and becoming more active each day. Their curious eyes would follow him around whenever he was in the yard, and sometimes they'd try to play with his shoelaces when he wasn't paying attention. That morning he made up his mind. He couldn't keep them, and he didn't want to deal with the hassle of finding them homes or taking them to a shelter. In his mind, he convinced himself that someone else would find them and take care of them. Maybe a family would spot them and give them good homes. He told himself these things as he gathered the puppies one by one. The little ones trusted him completely, having known only kindness from the neighbor who helped care for them when he was away. They didn't struggle as he picked them up, some of them even licking his hands as he carried them to his truck. He found an old box in his garage and lined it with some newspapers. One by one, he placed the puppies inside, their little tails still wagging, thinking this was just another game. Luna watched from her doghouse, her brown eyes following his movements. She seemed to sense something was wrong, but stayed where she was, used to following his commands. The puppies whimpered a bit, missing their mother's warmth, but they had each other for comfort in the box. As he loaded the box into his truck, the sun was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. He'd chosen this early hour carefully. Fewer people would be on the road to see what he was about to do. The puppies huddled together in their box, some sleeping, others looking around curiously at their new surroundings. Their innocent trust in him made what he was about to do even harder. He drove for about an hour, taking back roads to avoid the morning traffic. The radio played softly in the background, but he barely heard it over his own thoughts. Every now and then, he'd hear a small bark or whimper from the box, making his heart feel heavier with each mile. Finally, he reached a stretch of highway that seemed perfect for his plan, a grassy area off the road, partially hidden by tall grass and far enough from any houses. He pulled over, making sure no other cars were around. The morning was still cool, and dew covered the grass, making it sparkle in the early light. Taking the box from his truck, he walked several yards into the grass. The puppies were fully awake now, some standing up in the box to look around at their new surroundings. Their little noses worked overtime, sniffing the fresh air and new scents around them. They had no idea that their lives were about to change dramatically. He set the box down in the grass, taking one last look at the 12 pairs of trusting eyes looking back at him. Some of the puppies tried to climb out, eager to explore, while others stayed huddled together, seemingly uncertain about this new situation. Their tiny bodies wiggled with excitement and confusion, their tails still wagging hopefully. Without allowing himself to think too much about what he was doing, he turned and walked quickly back to his truck. He could hear the puppies beginning to whine as they realized he was leaving them behind. Their cries grew louder as he got into his truck, but he forced himself not to look back. Starting the engine, he pulled back onto the highway, trying to convince himself that someone would find them soon. As he drove away, he didn't know that his actions that morning would set in motion a chain of events that would change not only the puppies' lives, but his own life in ways he never could have imagined. The rising sun cast long shadows across the highway as he headed back home, where Luna waited, unaware that she would never see her puppies again. Later that same morning, a young woman who volunteered at the local animal rescue was driving to work along Route 80. She usually took the main highway, but today something had prompted her to take this quieter back route. Maybe it was fate, or maybe it was just luck, but this small decision would end up saving 12 little lives. The morning fog had lifted, but the autumn air still held a crisp chill. As she drove past the tall grass swaying in the breeze, something caught her eye. A slight movement that seemed out of place. At first, she thought it might have been a deer or maybe some wild rabbits, but something about it made her slow down her car. She pulled over to the shoulder of the road, her instincts telling her to investigate. Working at an animal rescue for the past 3 years had taught her to trust these feelings. She grabbed her phone and the emergency kit she always kept in her car. You never knew when you might need it in her line of work. As she stepped out of her car, the cool morning air nipped at her face. The grass was wet with dew, soaking the hem of her jeans as she carefully made her way through it. The sound of her footsteps was accompanied by something else, faint whimpers that made her heart skip a beat. She knew that sound all too well. Then she saw them, 12 tiny German Shepherd mix puppies, huddled together in a dampened cardboard box. Some were trying to climb out, while others were curled up together for warmth. Their fur was wet from the morning dew, and they were shivering in the cool air. When they saw her, their little tails started wagging hopefully, and a chorus of small whimpers filled the air. "Oh, you poor sweet babies," she whispered, her heart breaking at the sight. The puppies looked to be around 6 weeks old enough to be solid food, but far too young to survive on their own. She counted them twice, hardly believing there were actually 12 of them. They were all similar in appearance, clearly from the same litter, with those distinctive German Shepherd features that were impossible to miss. She immediately dropped to her knees beside the box, not caring about the wet grass soaking through her jeans. The puppies responded to her presence immediately, their little faces lighting up with hope. One particularly brave pup placed its tiny paws on the edge of the box, trying to reach her. Despite their ordeal, they still trusted humans enough to seek comfort. Pulling out her phone with shaking hands, she called her supervisor at the rescue center. "I need help," she said as soon as the call connected. "I found 12 puppies abandoned by the highway. They're alive, but they're cold and probably hungry. They look like German Shepherd mixes, about 6 weeks old." While waiting for help to arrive, she started examining the puppies one by one. Despite their frightening ordeal, they were surprisingly friendly, reaching out to lick her hands as she checked them over. They were cold and hungry, but miraculously, they all seemed to be in relatively good health. Someone had been caring for them until very recently. These weren't street dogs. She took off her warm jacket and carefully draped it over the shivering puppies. The cardboard box was starting to fall apart from the morning dew, so she needed to work quickly. From her emergency kit, she pulled out some puppy food she kept for just such occasions and began offering it to the hungry little ones. They ate eagerly, confirming her suspicion that they hadn't been abandoned for too long. As she waited for her colleagues to arrive, she sat beside the box, talking softly to the puppies. "You're safe now," she assured them, gently stroking their wet fur. "We're going to take good care of you." The puppies responded to her gentle voice, their earlier whimpers turning into tiny tail wags and curious sniffs. She noticed that each puppy had its own distinct personality. One was particularly brave, always the first to investigate any movement. Another was more shy, hanging back but watching everything with intelligent eyes. 2 of them seemed inseparable, always cuddling together no matter how she arranged them. Within 20 minutes, she heard the welcome sound of vehicles approaching. Her colleagues from the rescue center had arrived with their van, bringing blankets, food, and carriers. The morning sun was higher now, warming the air slightly, but the puppies were still cold from their night in the open. The rescue team worked efficiently, carefully transferring each puppy into warm, clean carriers. Each little one was wrapped in a soft blanket and given a preliminary health check. The team was experienced in handling abandoned animals, but even they were touched by the sight of 12 innocent puppies left to fend for themselves. As they loaded the carriers into the heated van, the volunteer couldn't help but wonder about the story behind these puppies. Who had left them here? Why hadn't they taken them to a shelter instead? She noticed some tire tracks in the mud nearby, fresh ones that told of a hasty departure. Someone had deliberately chosen this remote spot to abandon these innocent creatures. Looking at the empty cardboard box, now slowly dissolving in the morning dew, she felt a mix of sadness and hope. Sad that someone could abandon these precious lives, but hopeful because they had been found in time. These puppies would now have a chance at finding loving homes, but first, they needed to get them warm, fed, and checked by a vet. As she climbed back into her car to follow the rescue van to the shelter, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of an extraordinary story. Little did she know just how right she was, and how these 12 abandoned puppies would end up touching so many lives in the days to come. The rescue center burst into action as soon as the van carrying the 12 puppies pulled into the driveway. The morning sun was now fully up, casting long shadows across the parking lot as staff members rushed out to help. The volunteer who had found the puppies watched as her colleagues, people who had dedicated their lives to helping animals, moved with practiced efficiency. Inside the center's examination room, the rescue team worked like a well-oiled machine. They had handled many emergency cases before, but 12 puppies at once was something special. The room buzzed with activity as each puppy was carefully lifted from their carrier and placed on soft, clean towels. "Poor little things," whispered one of the veteran staff members as she gently dried a shivering puppy with a fluffy towel. "But they're fighters, all of them." The puppy in her arms responded by giving her hand a tiny lick, making her smile despite the seriousness of the situation. The team's vet tech, who had been with the shelter for over a decade, began examining each puppy one by one. She worked methodically, checking their temperatures, listening to their hearts, and looking for any signs of illness or injury. Her gentle hands moved with confidence, born from years of experience with rescued animals. "They're actually in surprisingly good condition," she announced, relief evident in her voice. "They're definitely hungry and a bit dehydrated, but whoever had them before was feeding them well." She paused to scratch behind the ears of the puppy she was examining. "They're about 6 weeks old, and they've clearly been handled by humans before. Look how friendly they are." Indeed, despite their ordeal, the puppies were remarkably trusting. Each time someone picked one up, their little tails would wag hopefully. They eagerly accepted the water and special puppy formula the team offered them, their pink tongues lapping up the nourishment they desperately needed. One of the younger volunteers was assigned to keep detailed records. She carefully photographed each puppy and noted their distinct characteristics. "This one has a white patch on his chest," she said, holding up one of the larger puppies. "And this little girl has a tiny spot of brown above her right eye." These details would be crucial for their medical records and eventual adoption profiles. As the morning progressed, the puppies began to show their individual personalities more clearly. The brave one from earlier continued to be the most outgoing, trying to play with everyone who came near. 2 of the smaller ones remained inseparable, crying if they were separated even for examinations. Another revealed himself to be quite the escape artist, repeatedly trying to climb out of his temporary enclosure to explore. The staff set up a special area just for the 12 siblings, a warm, clean space with soft blankets and plenty of room. They needed to keep them together not just for comfort, but also to monitor them all closely for any delayed signs of distress. Small water bowls and plates of softened puppy food were placed within easy reach. One of the most heartwarming moments came when the puppies, now warm and fed, began to play with each other. Their earlier fears seemed forgotten as they tumbled and wrestled, their tiny barks echoing through the shelter. The staff couldn't help but pause in their work to watch the playful scene, their hearts lifting at the sight. "It's amazing how resilient they are," commented the shelter manager, watching the puppies play. "Just a few hours ago, they were abandoned by the highway, and now look at them." She had seen many cases of abandoned animals in her years at the shelter, but something about these 12 puppies touched her deeply. The team decided to keep the puppies together for at least a few days to monitor their health. They would need their first round of vaccinations, deworming treatment, and microchips before they could be considered for adoption. The shelter's social media coordinator began taking photos and videos, knowing that their story would touch many hearts. By late afternoon, the puppies had settled into a routine. They would play energetically for short bursts, then curl up together in a pile for naps. The staff had created a comfortable nest of blankets in their enclosure, and the siblings always arranged themselves in the same pattern, the two inseparable ones in the middle, the brave one keeping watch from the edge, and the others fitting themselves around them like puzzle pieces. The volunteer who had found them stopped by their enclosure one last time before heading home. The puppies were sleeping peacefully, their little chests rising and falling in unison. Looking at them now, safe and comfortable, it was hard to imagine them shivering in that wet cardboard box by the highway. As she turned to leave, she noticed something that made her pause. The security cameras near the highway, where she had found the puppies, might have captured something. Maybe they could find out who had abandoned these precious lives. She made a mental note to check with the local authorities tomorrow. Little did she know, those security cameras would reveal much more than expected, leading to a chain of events that would change not only the puppies' lives, but also the life of the person who had abandoned them. The rescue operation was just the beginning of an extraordinary story that would touch the hearts of their entire community. The next morning, the rescue center's social media coordinator sat at her desk, carefully reviewing the photos and videos she'd taken of the 12 German Shepherd puppies. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed out their story, not because she was nervous, but because she knew how powerful this story could be. She had been sharing rescue stories for years, but something about these 12 siblings felt different. Her first post was simple, a photo of all 12 puppies huddled together, with a brief description of how they were found abandoned by the highway. Within minutes, the comments started pouring in. People from all over the state were sharing their outrage, their sympathy, and their desire to help. The post was being shared faster than anything the rescue had ever posted before. "Have you seen this?" called out one of the volunteers, holding up her phone. The local news station had picked up the story and wanted to come do a feature. Then another call came in, this time from a national pet welfare organization. By lunchtime, the rescue center's phones were ringing nonstop. Everyone wanted to know more about the 12 puppies who had been left to fend for themselves. The security footage from the highway gas station proved to be the turning point. The morning shift attendant had been scrolling through social media during his break when he recognized the story. He remembered seeing a truck pull over in that area early yesterday morning. The footage was grainy but clear enough to show a man unloading a box from his truck and leaving it in the grass. "I wish I had known," the attendant told the police when they came to collect the footage. "I saw the truck but didn't think anything of it. People pull over there all the time." His words reflected what many people felt. How often do we miss chances to help because we don't realize what's happening right in front of us? Back at the rescue center, the puppies were becoming internet celebrities. Each update about their progress received thousands of likes and shares. People loved hearing about their different personalities. The brave one who always led the pack, the two inseparable siblings who wouldn't sleep unless they were cuddled together, the clever one who figured out how to open the food container. The rescue center decided to set up a live stream camera in the puppies' area. Soon, people from all over the world were tuning in to watch the siblings play, eat, and sleep. Office workers would keep the stream open in a corner of their computer screens, finding comfort in watching the puppies' innocent antics during stressful days. "Look at how many people are watching," exclaimed one of the younger volunteers, pointing to the viewer count that kept climbing. The live stream chat was filled with messages of support and questions about adoption. People were invested in these puppies' lives now, checking in multiple times a day to see how they were doing. The story took an unexpected turn when someone recognized the truck from the gas station footage. It belonged to a local trucking company, and the distinctive scratch on its side made it easily identifiable. As this information spread online, the rescue center staff worried about how it might affect their work. They didn't want revenge or punishment, they wanted understanding and change. Local news crews started showing up at the rescue center, wanting to film the puppies and interview the staff. The shelter manager handled these requests carefully, making sure the focus stayed on the importance of responsible pet ownership rather than sensationalizing the abandonment. She used every interview as a chance to educate people about proper animal care and the alternatives to abandonment. The puppies, unaware of their fame, continued to thrive. They were getting bigger and stronger each day, their playful personalities shining through more and more. The live stream captured countless heartwarming moments, like when the smallest puppy finally gathered the courage to climb over his siblings to reach the food bowl first, or when the quiet one revealed a surprising talent for carrying around toys twice the size. Comments and messages poured in from around the world. A classroom of third graders in Canada wrote letters to the puppies. An elderly woman in Florida crocheted 12 tiny blankets and sent them to the shelter. A children's author in England asked permission to write a book about their story. As the footage from the gas station made its rounds on social media, something unexpected happened. Instead of calls for punishment, many people began sharing their own stories of times when they had felt overwhelmed with pet responsibilities. The conversation shifted from anger to understanding, from judgment to education. The rescue center's social media coordinator found herself managing not just updates about the puppies, but a growing movement for animal welfare awareness. People wanted to know how they could help, how they could prevent similar situations in their own communities. The story of 12 abandoned puppies was becoming a catalyst for positive change. Meanwhile, unknown to everyone, the truck driver was watching all of this unfold. Every night, he would check the live stream, watching his former puppies play and grow. The overwhelming response to their story, and especially the unexpected compassion some people showed in their comments, was affecting him deeply. He hadn't expected any of this when he made that fateful decision to leave them by the highway. The police station was quiet that morning when the truck driver walked in. His hands were shaking slightly as he approached the front desk. He had spent the last few days watching his former puppies on the live stream, reading thousands of comments, and fighting an internal battle with his conscience. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. "I'm the one who abandoned those puppies," he said quietly to the officer at the desk. The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment. The officer, who had been following the story like everyone else in town, sat up straighter in his chair. He hadn't expected this. Most cases like this went unsolved, with the perpetrators never coming forward. The truck driver's confession set things in motion. Within hours, he was sitting in an interview room, telling his story to a detective. He explained about his dog Luna, about feeling overwhelmed when the puppies were born, about convincing himself that someone would find them quickly. His voice cracked several times as he spoke, especially when describing how the puppies had trusted him right up until the moment he left them. What happened next surprised everyone. Instead of immediately pressing charges, the detective listened carefully to the whole story. He could see genuine remorse in the truck driver's eyes. This wasn't someone who had acted out of cruelty, but out of desperation and poor judgment. The detective had seen enough true animal cruelty cases to know the difference. The case landed on the desk of a judge known for her creative approach to justice. After reviewing all the details, she called a meeting with the rescue center staff, the police, and the truck driver. The room was tense as everyone gathered, but what emerged from that meeting would change many lives. Instead of jail time, the judge ordered the truck driver to complete 1,000 hours of community service at the rescue center. "You need to understand what these animals go through," she explained, her voice firm but not unkind. "And the center needs help. This way, some good can come from this situation." The rescue center staff was unsure at first. They had seen the security footage, had cared for those abandoned puppies. But they also believed in second chances. After all, that's what they gave to animals every day. They agreed to supervise the community service, though they set strict rules and guidelines. The truck driver's first day at the shelter was awkward and uncomfortable. Everyone knew who he was, and he could feel their eyes on him as he cleaned kennels and filled water bowls. The hardest moment came when he had to walk past the area where his former puppies lived. Their happy barks and wagging tails made his heart ache with regret. But something unexpected began to happen as the days passed. The truck driver, who had never really connected with animals before, started to see them differently. He watched how the staff treated each animal with kindness and respect, no matter their condition or background. He saw how even the most frightened dogs could learn to trust again with patience and gentle care. One morning, he arrived early to find one of the staff members bottle feeding a tiny kitten that had been brought in overnight. The dedication in her eyes, the gentle way she held the fragile creature, it moved something in him. He asked if she could teach him how to do it, and her surprised smile was the first real connection he'd made at the shelter. The puppies he had abandoned were growing quickly, their personalities becoming more distinct each day. From a distance, he watched them play and interact with potential adopters. He learned their individual quirks, how one always carried his favorite toy everywhere, how another would howl along when someone sang. They were no longer just a problem to solve, they were living beings with their own unique spirits. Working at the shelter opened his eyes to the reality of animal abandonment. He saw the scared, hungry faces of dogs left tied to the shelter's front gate. He helped care for cats found in boxes by dumpsters. Each case hit him harder now, understanding fully what he had almost done to his puppies. His own dog, Luna, was still at home, but his relationship with her was changing too. He started spending more time with her when he wasn't at the shelter or driving his routes. He bought her proper toys, took her for walks, and even enrolled in a basic dog training class. The shelter staff noticed these changes and began to see him in a different light. The local community's reaction to his confession and punishment was mixed. Some people were still angry, posting harsh comments online. But others, especially those who saw him working tirelessly at the shelter, began to share messages of support. His story became part of a larger conversation about responsibility, redemption, and the importance of asking for help when needed. The judge's creative sentence was making headlines too, with other courts around the country taking notice. It sparked discussions about restorative justice and whether traditional punishments were always the best solution. Animal welfare organizations began studying the case as an example of how to turn a negative situation into an opportunity for education and change. As summer turned to fall, the rescue center had become like a second home to the truck driver. Between his regular routes, he spent every spare moment there, going far beyond his required community service hours. The staff, who had once watched him warily, now greeted him warmly when he arrived for his shifts. They could see the change in him. It showed in every gentle touch, every soft word spoken to the animals in his care. One rainy morning, a scared pit bull was brought in, so terrified it wouldn't let anyone near. The dog had been found chained to a fence, its ribs showing through its coat. The staff tried everything, but the dog remained huddled in the corner of its kennel, trembling. Then something remarkable happened. The truck driver sat quietly by the kennel, just talking softly about his routes, about the things he saw on the road. Hour after hour, he stayed there. By evening, the pit bull had inched closer, drawn by the calm, steady presence. The shelter staff watched in amazement as the frightened dog finally took a treat from the truck driver's hand. Sometimes, he said later, they just need to know someone has the patience to wait for them. It was a lesson he had learned himself over these past months. His own dog, Luna, had transformed too. No longer just a guard dog, she now rode with him in his truck on local routes. He had fitted out a special area in his cab with her bed and water bowl. Other drivers at the truck stop would smile seeing them together, Luna's head hanging out the window, her ears flapping in the wind. Some even started bringing treats for her. The 12 puppies he had abandoned were growing into beautiful young dogs. Though he still couldn't bring himself to work directly with them, he watched their progress every day. Each time one would find a potential forever home, his heart would feel both heavy and light, sad to see them go, but happy they would have the love they deserved. Working at the shelter had opened his eyes to so many things. He learned about the silent language of animals, how a wagging tail could mean different things, how a cat's slow blink was a sign of trust, how even the smallest gesture could make a difference in an animal's life. The staff taught him about proper nutrition, basic veterinary care, and the importance of spaying and neutering pets. One day, while cleaning kennels, he overheard a family trying to surrender their elderly dog because they were moving and couldn't take him. Without thinking, he stepped forward and shared his own story. He talked about regret, about learning to be responsible, about how animals deserve our loyalty. The family listened, and by the end of the conversation, they were making plans to find pet-friendly housing instead. His experience began to change how he did his job too. He started keeping cat food and water bowls in his truck for the strays he'd see at rest stops. He made friends with other drivers who rescued animals they found along their routes. Together, they created an informal network, helping transport rescued animals to shelters and forever homes across the country. The rescue center's social media followers watched his transformation with interest. The staff would sometimes share stories about his work with the animals, always respecting his privacy by never showing his face or using his name. Comments that had once been angry were now supportive, with many people sharing their own stories of learning and growth. Even on his busiest days, he found time to help at the shelter. He would arrive early to walk dogs before his route, or stop by late at night to bottle feed orphaned kittens. The dedication he had once given only to his job now extended to these animals who needed him. His gruff exterior had softened, replaced by a gentle patience that seemed to particularly comfort the most traumatized animals. The shelter manager noticed how he would spend extra time with the animals others might overlook. The older dogs, the shy ones, the ones with special needs. He seemed to understand their hesitation, their fear of being left behind. Sometimes she would find him sitting in the kennel with a nervous dog, just reading aloud from his truck route maps, letting them get used to the sound of his voice. His community service hours were nearly complete, but everyone knew he wouldn't stop coming. The shelter had become part of who he was now. He had learned every animal's name, their quirks, their favorite treats. He could tell when a dog was feeling under the weather just by subtle changes in their behavior. The staff now sought his opinion when making decisions about animal care. Luna had been spayed, and he worked with the shelter vet to make sure she got all her proper vaccinations and checkups. His backyard, once just a place for her to patrol, now had toys, a doghouse he built himself, and even a small pool for hot days. He had learned that being a pet owner meant more than just providing food and shelter. It meant giving love, time, and understanding. As fall moved toward winter, he found himself sharing his story more openly with others. When new volunteers came to the shelter, he would tell them about his journey from someone who saw animals as just property to someone who understood their true worth. His honesty and vulnerability helped others open up about their own struggles and learn from his experiences. Winter had settled in, and the rescue center was decorated with twinkling lights and holiday decorations. Almost 6 months had passed since the day 12 puppies were abandoned by the highway. Now, something remarkable was about to happen. The last of the 12 puppies was finally going to her forever home. But the story didn't end there. It was really just beginning. The truck driver stood in the shelter's main room, watching as the last puppy, the shy one with the spot above her eye, played with her soon-to-be family. His heart felt full in a way he never would have understood months ago. He had helped clean and prepare the adoption packets for each of the 12 puppies, though he had kept his distance during the actual adoptions. This time was different. "I think you should be part of this one," the shelter manager said softly, touching his arm. "You've earned it." She had watched his transformation over these months, seen how deeply he had changed. His community service hours had been completed weeks ago, but he still came to the shelter every chance he got. The adopting family knew the story. Everyone did. But they didn't react with anger when they learned who he was. Instead, the mother smiled and said, "It's amazing how life gives us second chances, isn't it?" Her words brought unexpected tears to his eyes. The puppy, now almost full-grown, wagged her tail as if in agreement. That evening, after the adoption was complete, he sat in his truck with Luna beside him. She was different too, no longer just a guard dog, but a beloved companion who went everywhere with him. He thought about all 12 puppies now in loving homes across the state. Each adoption had been carefully planned, each family thoroughly vetted. The shelter made sure all the siblings would stay in touch through a special social media group. His phone buzzed with notifications from that group several times a day now. Pictures of the puppies in their new homes, videos of them playing with their families, stories of their adventures, it all flooded in regularly. The shy one who left today would soon join her siblings in this digital family album. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. The shelter manager called everyone together for their morning meeting. The truck driver stood in the back, as usual, Luna sitting calmly at his feet. The manager smiled as she made an unexpected announcement. They wanted him to become their new transport coordinator. "You know trucks, you know routes, and most importantly, you know animals now," she explained. "We need someone to organize and oversee our rescue transport network." The position would let him combine his driving skills with his new passion for animal welfare. He could help create a system to transport rescued animals safely across the country. His eyes swept across the room, taking in the faces of people who had gone from suspicious observers to trusted friends. The same staff who had once watched him warily now looked at him with genuine smiles. Even the most skeptical volunteer was nodding in approval. He thought about that morning 6 months ago when he had made the terrible decision to abandon 12 innocent puppies. How could he have known that his worst mistake would lead to his life's greatest purpose? The journey from that moment to this one had changed everything about how he saw the world. Luna nudged his hand with her nose, as if sensing his emotion. She had been the start of it all, his first dog, who had gone from a simple guard dog to the companion who helped him understand what it meant to truly care for another living being. Now, she helped him welcome new rescue dogs, showing them that they could trust again. The transport network he would coordinate was already taking shape in his mind. He knew other truck drivers had already made connections with animal lovers who drove routes across the country. They could create a system of volunteers, a chain of compassion stretching across highways and state lines. Later that day, he received a special delivery at the shelter, a hand-drawn card from a little girl who had adopted one of the original 12 puppies. She had drawn a picture of her dog playing in the snow. "Thank you for letting us find each other," she had written in crooked letters. Her mother had added a note too. "Sometimes our mistakes lead us exactly where we need to be." As he walked through the shelter that evening, doing final checks on all the animals, he felt a deep sense of peace. Each dog and cat he passed was part of his extended family now. He knew their stories, their fears, their favorite treats. They knew him too, not as the man who had once abandoned puppies, but as someone they could trust. The last thing he did before leaving was check the shelter's live stream setup. They still ran regular streams, though now they showed different rescue animals each week. The audience had grown, and with it, the number of successful adoptions. People from around the world still tuned in, still invested in the stories of hope that started with 12 abandoned puppies. Driving home that night, with Luna in her special seat beside him and the shelter keys now permanently attached to his caring, he smiled. Tomorrow, he would start planning the transport network. There were animals out there who needed help, and he knew better than anyone that sometimes the longest journeys begin with a single wrong turn that leads you exactly where you were meant to be.